Alexander Morel was not only a rich man, he embodied success. Born into a wealthy family, he had been raised in a spacious villa overlooking the hills, a home that seemed to symbolize all the grandeur and perfection of his life. Every detail of his youth had been carefully orchestrated. A private education in the best schools, luxurious vacations in exclusive destinations, meetings with the biggest figures in the business world. Alexander had what many considered a dream come true. He had succeeded in twisting destiny in his image. A brilliant career in the financial sector, where he had stood out from his early years as a young prodigy, investments in innovative companies, luxurious properties in several cities around the world, and influential friends who supported him at every stage of his rise. But beyond the glitter of this golden life, there was a void. A void that was neither filled by the dozens of contracts signed, nor by the recognition that his status brought him. He felt this emptiness every evening, a form of existential boredom which intruded into his life like a heavy cloud. Yet he never talked about it. He was the man of action, the self-made man who had no time to indulge in such thoughts. But there was a shadow in his past that he had carefully erased, a relationship he tried to forget. Claire was not one of those who was easily described in simple terms. She was neither a high-ranking woman nor a celebrity, but she had a beauty that did not go unnoticed. Not the artificial beauty that you can buy in magazines, but a natural, peaceful beauty of rare authenticity. His deep brown eyes seemed to see beyond the surface of things. His smile, always sincere, echoed a quiet strength that came from his independence. Claire had grown up in a modest environment, but she had this ability to make her way in a world where women were expected to be both invisible and perfect. She was acutely intelligent, able to assert herself without having to shout or be noticed. Alexander had met her when he was still young, ambitious, and carefree. She was the ideal companion for a man like him, beautiful, loving, ready to support him in his dreams. At first, he had loved her with a burning passion, seduced by her simplicity and her ability to understand him, but also by the obvious fact that she was a challenge for him. Claire never lowered herself in the face of his success. She respected him, but she did not idolize him. She pushed him to be a better version of himself, while remaining firmly anchored in his own values. But in his youth, Alexander did not see this depth. He was too absorbed in the illusion of his grandeur. He had believed that the love between them would be eternal, that their relationship would last effortlessly. But he also had a worldview distorted by pride and ambition. A world where he was the center, where everything gravitated around him. Claire, despite her sincere love, had felt like a stranger in this world of glitz and success. And one day, she realized that she deserved more than a place as an extra in Alexander's life. She had left the city, the man he had become, and she had rebuilt herself, far from him, far from this world. And, deep down, Alexander knew it was his fault. But he never wanted to admit it. Not then, and even less now. Claire had moved away, seeking to heal from the pain of this separation that Alexander had never considered necessary. She had chosen a simple life, far from the pretenses of the society he had embraced so eagerly. She had settled in a small house in the countryside, a place where she could breathe, heal, and find herself. She had found a man with whom she had built a different life, more modest, but full of meaning. He did not come from high society, but he loved her deeply, with an attention and a sincerity that Alexander had never been able to offer him. With him, she had children, 3 triplets, a boy and 2 girls, who had become her most precious treasure. They were her joy, her love, and her living memory of everything she had built after leaving Alexander. Claire had never sought revenge. She had chosen to create something pure, something uncontaminated by the mistakes of the past. His children were the embodiment of this new life, a life full of simplicity and depth, far from the superficiality of the world in which Alexander had drowned. As he grew up, his children became his allies in this quest for truth. Claire was calm. She had learned to rebuild herself and to love again, without a shadow of regret. But, even if she had not looked for him, Alexander returned to her thoughts. She knew that, in another life, in another world, she could have been happy by his side. But it was no longer his world. She had left him to flourish elsewhere, in true love, in the peace that she had built for herself and her children. The years had passed, but Alexander had never forgotten her. He thought of Claire from time to time, remembering her sweet and deep gaze, the pure love she had given him, this love that he had taken for granted, that he had not been able to appreciate at its true value. It haunted him, because he knew deep down that he could never find a love like that again. Julie, his future wife, was beautiful, but she did not have the depth of Claire. She came from an influential family, certainly, but it was above all her status, her position, her network, which had attracted Alexander. He had chosen her for what she represented in his world, not for what she really was. It was then that an insidious idea germinated in his mind. He was going to marry Julie, but not just for love. He wanted Claire by his side, not to rekindle the flame, but to humiliate her. He wanted her to see his success, his wealth, his perfect life, and above all, to witness his happiness with Julie, a woman who corresponded to the image he had built for himself. He hoped she would feel small, insignificant, like she had made a bad choice in leaving him. He felt like she owed him something, that she had stolen part of his destiny, and he wanted to get back what he felt was rightfully his. He wanted to see her look, this pure love, turn into pain. What he didn't know was that this revenge was going to be much more complex than he had imagined. The wedding day arrived, and the church seemed like an opera stage, where every detail had been meticulously orchestrated to reflect the perfect image of the union of Alexander and Julie. Rays of sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors on the polished wooden benches, while garlands of white flowers framed the columns, adding a touch of elegance to the atmosphere. The guests, dressed in chic and impeccable outfits, whispered among themselves, admiring the opulence of the place and the perfection of the ceremony that was to come. Alexander stood there, on Julie's arm, a frozen smile on his face. The shine of his clothes and the confidence in his posture exuded a sense of quiet superiority. He was certain that this day would mark a turning point in his life, and that he would finally have the opportunity to close the Claire chapter definitively. The wedding was not simply a celebration of his love for Julie, it was a triumph, a personal victory. Each element of the ceremony was a piece of a meticulously assembled puzzle, with Claire as the finishing touch. He chose to add spice to the moment. The invitation sent to Claire was neither warm nor affectionate. It was a distant, almost clinical invitation, where he asked her to introduce herself if she wished, as if she were nothing more than an old acquaintance who he granted a tiny place in his new world of success. But in reality, he only had one intention in mind: to see her in the shadow of her perfect happiness and to humiliate her without her being able to respond. He had imagined her solemn arrival, her palpable sadness, her gaze lost in the crowd. But he hadn't anticipated what he was going to see. When Claire walked through the church doors, Alexander noticed her immediately. She was there, calm, serene, a quiet grace emanating from her. There was no longer any trace of the vulnerable young woman he had once known. Time had erased all pain, giving way to an inner strength that even he, in all his greatness, could not ignore. She wore a simple dress, but with an understated elegance that contrasted with the frills and bright fabrics of the other guests. At his side, his children, 3 triplets full of energy and life, surrounded him. Their presence was a revelation, a destabilization for Alexander. The children, a boy and 2 girls, were like an explosion of light in this solemn church. Their crystalline bursts of laughter, their lively movements and their curious faces did not go unnoticed. Contrary to what he had imagined, Claire was not alone, extinct, withdrawn. She was surrounded by what he had never been able to offer her: a family, children whom she had raised in love and joy. With every look that Alexander looked at them, he felt a growing frustration, a frustration that he couldn't hide. These children were the epitome of what he never had and could never have: a truly united family, built on a solid foundation of love and effort. The ceremony progressed, but Alexander could not take his eyes off Claire and her triplets. He focused on Julie, but every smile from his future wife, every word a guest addressed to him seemed to be lost in the inner tumult that was growing within him. He couldn't get rid of the image of Claire, and even more so the image of his family, his accomplishment. Claire, whom he had abandoned without remorse, seemed to have found something he had never sought: something that transcended material comfort and the illusion of success, authentic and lasting happiness. When the ceremony came to an end and the guests began to make their way towards the entrance, Alexander finally felt ready to carry out his plan. He stood there, smiling, greeting his guests, confident that everything was going to go as planned. Then Claire approached, her children crowding around her. She stopped in front of him, her gaze calm, almost benevolent, but the conviction in her eyes left no doubt. She was not seeking revenge or humiliating herself. She was there, like a mirror, reflecting what he had become and what he had lost. "Congratulations, Alexander," she said with surprising gentleness, her voice closed but full of quiet dignity. "Julie is lucky for you." She looked at him for a moment, and her look had nothing contemptuous, nothing haughty. It was simply a look full of understanding, of kindness, almost a silent blessing. Then, without hesitation, she turned to her children, her family, what she had managed to build. "Come on, children. We have another party to celebrate tonight." At that moment, a weight fell on Alexander. A sudden and poignant realization. He had never seen Claire from this perspective, and he only now understood the extent of what he had lost. It wasn't just his love he had thrown away, but a life he could never have created for himself. His children, the triplets, were a reflection of this strength, of this life that he would never have. He had wanted to see her lose, to lose herself in the pain of her own success, but what he had discovered was that Claire had never needed him. She had not needed his possessions, his power, nor his approval. She had created something much greater, a family based on love, sacrifice, and inner peace. The rest of the evening passed in a strangely heavy atmosphere, as if the air itself had absorbed the tensions that inhabited it. Alexander, the man used to having everything under control, suddenly felt vulnerable and disoriented. The orchestra played an elegant melody, but in the shadows, loud laughter pierced the cozy atmosphere. It was not the most influential guests who attracted attention, but the triplets, these children full of life and light. Their effervescent presence seemed to invade every corner of the room, eclipsing the polite conversations, forced smiles, and superficial exchanges of the evening. Alexander heard whispers, barely concealed questions, furtive glances turning towards him, as if the guests were trying to understand what he felt when seeing Claire, this woman he had once believed he could dominate, now so close to a form of simple and pure happiness that he had never known how to appreciate. The triplets ran, played, bickered in disorderly harmony, but it created a feeling of life, of human warmth, that the frozen opulence of his own marriage could not match. Their innocence, their boundless energy, and their apparent bond with their mother seemed unreal, as if these children represented a parallel world, a world that Claire had built after him, a world that he had never been able to see. It was a world of happiness without ostentation, of connections without pretense. Each burst of laughter from the triplets, each flash of curiosity on their faces, contrasted so much with the coldness and pretension of this marriage that Alexander felt, little by little, the pride he nourished in this union dissipate, like a mirage which slowly collapsed. He could almost feel the guests' eyes on him. Some, shocked by this unexpected intrusion into real life, couldn't help but look away from the perfect scene he had created to focus on the authenticity emanating from Claire's children. Their laughter, their energy, their carefree curiosity took precedence over the polite speeches he had prepared, the smiles he had calculated. Deep down, he knew it. It was not his wealth or his social position that was admired, it was not Julie's beauty, nor the magnificence of the evening. It was Claire's raw simplicity, the quiet strength she exuded. She didn't need grandeur, sparkling jewelry, or recognition from society. She had created something of inestimable value, a home, a family, and a life. She was the real star of the evening, even without trying to be. As the evening progressed, Alexander felt the isolation strengthen. The smiles addressed to him seemed empty, almost meaningless. He no longer had any conviction, any pride. The reality, cruel and implacable, fell on him. He had never been able to offer Claire what she deserved. He had never been able to live up to her love, her dignity, her inner strength. By seeking to surpass it, by seeking to possess this perfection that he believed to be so desirable, he had lost. This marriage, which he had conceived as the ultimate victory, was in reality his greatest failure. Because Claire, surrounded by her children, did not need anything he had to offer. She possessed what he secretly desired, what he had never known how to cultivate: true love, an inner peace that nothing could disturb, and an unshakable dignity. When Alexander returned home that night, he felt no satisfaction. The evening had not been the consecration he had hoped for. Julie, who had been his strategic choice, could not fill the void that had opened up inside him. She, with her perfect smile and her calculated attentions, had never been the woman he was truly looking for. The reality was more bitter. He had convinced himself that she was the answer to everything, that she would fill the void left by Claire, but she was only an illusion. A beautiful illusion, certainly, but an illusion nonetheless. He sat alone in the huge empty living room, looking at the shadows looming around him. The silence in the house was deafening. He no longer had a taste for wealth, fame, or even Julie's company. Everything now seemed insignificant to him. Memories of Claire and her children came flooding back into her mind in powerful waves. He saw their laughter again, the glow of their joyful faces, and he realized that he had lost everything. He hadn't just lost a woman, he had lost a life, an opportunity to know what it was to be truly loved. Claire, so strong, so serene, had everything he should have wanted, everything he had always secretly dreamed of, but had not been able to appreciate. And by wanting to reduce her to a shadow in his perfect life, he had inflicted the greatest humiliation on himself. He had sacrificed what was most precious to pursue a chimera. This truth would haunt him for the rest of his life, because now he knew what he had lost forever.